Welcome into the GoVols247 Podcast. I'm Ben McKee, and I'm joined by Ryan Callahan and Patrick Brown on this edition of the GoVols247 Podcast, a Thursday, August 13th edition of the show, and a very important one because Tennessee football has a very important day this weekend. Tennessee will scrimmage for the first time on Saturday morning inside of Neyland Stadium. Josh Heupel will speak afterwards. Of course, it's important because of the quarterback battle, but it's also very important for a myriad of other reasons. Ryan, Patrick, before we dive into it, how are y'all doing?
Doing well. Ready to have I'd say watch some football, but have some football to talk about. We've seen some practice glimpses of it, but so much hinges on this scrimmage. Looking forward to finding out a little more about this team and obviously this quarterback competition that's gotten pretty interesting.
I'm good too, Ben. But today I'm all about ball. No grocery store talk, no baseball. We're straight to ball because that's what people want.
We don't want to upset the people in the comments like we did last time.
I did apologize to the person. I don't have their username in front of me, or I'd give them a shout out. But I did apologize to that person, and we will move on immediately and not dibble dabble in any grocery.
Fun allowed.
No fun for
Only
a few
ball.
moments. Only ball, which part of me does appreciate. But we will move on to the ball. And Ryan, something that's been on my mind this week as we build up to scrimmage number 1 on Saturday is just the magnitude of it. And I know we hype up every scrimmage every fall because there are always unknowns during fall camp. But I've been trying to rack my brain around and see if I'm putting a little too much sauce on it. But this feels like one of the more important scrimmages of the Josh Heupel era because of the inexperience at quarterback / competition, the newness on the defense, the line of scrimmage, sorting some things out there. I guess maybe the proper way to put it is just that this is as much there's as many question marks around this scrimmage in this fall camp as any I can remember under Josh Heupel.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and this is maybe the most consequential first scrimmage that we've seen in preseason camp in quite some time. I definitely would go back past the Josh Heupel era. I mean, there were obviously previous quarterback competitions, but there's not been any like this, and I think this is the most fascinating quarterback battle Tennessee's had in probably about 20 years. I'm not sure they've had one quite like this. I mean, that you could maybe make the case for, when Dobbs and some of those guys were around, there were a couple interesting battles around that time with Justin Worley and some of those types of guys. But this is really interesting because you have two highly ranked former prospects that really both have an interesting claim to the job, and there's some long-term ramifications to go along with this decision in addition to just trying to win in week 1. So, and obviously week 2 at Georgia Tech looms large on the schedule. So yeah, there's the quarterback is one part of it, but yeah, it's the defense having so many question marks coming off last season and the coaching changes and new personnel there. So it is a very consequential scrimmage, and I can't remember one that I've anticipated and that other people seem to be anticipating as much as this scrimmage in quite some time.
Yeah, I think it's up there. It's not just going out there and playing football. I mean, I think Tennessee's got some things it really needs to figure out. At the same token, I will be contrarian a little bit and say that, they didn't just show up and start working out on the field, what was it, a week ago? Like, they've been working all off season. So in terms of the depth chart and stuff, like, there's more stuff settled than they probably would lead on publicly. So, someone may look good in the scrimmage, but that doesn't mean they're all of a sudden going to start. Right. So, that there is that element of it too. But at the same token, you kind of touched on it, Ryan. Obviously, the quarterback competition, it's going to be a major checkpoint for that position battle between Faison Brandon and George McIntyre. And you said, I assumed you were referencing the Brent Schaefer, Eric Ainge quarterback battle when you said it's the most, because it's similar. It's two young guys that they believe in, that they've invested in and recruited to get here, and you're letting it play out organically. So that's how important that is and how that setting is going to be. And this is the most game-like settings. And yes, Josh Heupel said on the first day of practice that they're going to evaluate everything, and there is a whole body of work that they're going to consider. But this is going to be the most game-like atmosphere that they're going to encounter. So I think that's important. And defensively, you touched on it too, Ryan. I don't know if there's as much questions about necessarily the depth chart, but what are the front two units going to look like? How are they going to meld together the defensive line and the linebackers in terms of lineups and packages and things like that. So that's something that Jim Knowles talked about going into preseason camp. He talked about it being like going in a laboratory and figuring out, what you can come up with. And this is a chance in a game to see how those things work. And also situationally too, that's something he emphasized going into spring ball that you can emphasize in a scrimmage setting like this, where you're working on third downs and red zone and those things like that in the natural kind of flow of playing football. So it's a huge scrimmage. And so is the second one too, coming up. This is going to be a very important stretch for Tennessee over the next, 9 days, 8 days. I'm not very good at math.
All right, Ryan, I feel like we had a really good conversation about the improvements and strong start to fall camp for George McIntyre on our last podcast, and where the quarterback battle stood at the beginning of this week, which was the start of week number 2 for Tennessee fall camp. But let's update and set the scene for the Tennessee quarterback competition heading into scrimmage number 1. How would you explain just kind of where things stand heading into Saturday for a casual Tennessee fan that isn't living and breathing with every Twitter post of every day throughout the preseason? And we will note Tennessee is off today. They will have practice on Friday before scrimmaging on Saturday. So they will have another practice before hitting the field inside Neyland. But how would you explain just the scene of the quarterback competition heading into scrimmage number 1?
Yeah, it feels like a neck and neck race now, and that was, I don't think that was the case, or at least the perception of it from the outside was that was not the case going into preseason camp. At the same time, it was always a situation where whoever Faison Brandon, whoever was the leader was going to have to earn it in camp, and so Faison Brandon still had to go prove himself, as we said, going into camp, and he's not. I wouldn't say he's been bad by any stretch. I think Faison Brandon still has had some good moments and still has done a lot of the things he did in the spring. He's just, I think this has been more about George McIntyre and the way he has shown up so far. And so if you base it on just what has happened to this point, George McIntyre's probably outplayed Faison Brandon a little bit, it sounds like, through the first several days of camp. But it's not based on just that. And we've said all along, George McIntyre probably has to, maybe not by a huge margin, but by a pretty decent margin, probably has to outplay Faison Brandon if he's going to be the guy. If this is a close call, you might err with the upside of Faison Brandon. At the same time, this is what makes it such an interesting battle. You're trying to win now while also making the right decision on both of these quarterbacks for the future, because you know that if someone takes the job and runs with it this season and shows that they're the quarterback of the future, the other one's probably in the transfer portal in January, or at least there's a real chance of that. So you've got to get this right in the long run. But there's also this interesting element where Tennessee's got to worry about winning at Georgia Tech week 2. That's a big game for Josh Heupel, because if you lose that game, it changes the outlook for the rest of the season. It starts to recast what this season might be before you even start SEC play. That's an important game for this program, I think. So you need to win that one. And so if you think George McIntyre gives you the best chance to win that game, you may have to go with George McIntyre to start the season, knowing that doesn't necessarily have to be the final word on the quarterback of the future conversation. You're going to have several more games down the stretch. There's a scenario where someone wins the job and loses it during the season. Say you lose a couple games in October or something. We've seen schools, we've seen Tennessee with Tyler Bray and some guys like that. You can pivot to a freshman or whatever, a young quarterback later in the season if things aren't going as well as you expected. So I think there's a bit more finality to it if Faison Brandon wins the job in camp than there would be if George McIntyre wins it. But either way, it's a complicated race. But right now, I think it's very close, and I think George McIntyre has really answered the bell with all this summer talk of Faison Brandon having the upper hand. He seems to have punched back and said he's going to have a lot to say about how this race goes. And so I think it really does come down to the scrimmages now because of the way he started.
Patrick, have your thoughts on the quarterback competition changed since our conversation on Tuesday?
I mean, maybe a little bit, Ben. I still, I guess if my prediction, or I guess I'm on record as saying I think Faison will win the job and be the guy. I'm not ready to come off that yet, but as Ryan alluded to, McIntyre has made a push here the first week or so, or first, week and a half of camp. But he's got to sustain it, kind of like we talked about the other day. And to Ryan's point too, like this is just maybe one chapter, because who knows what's going to happen when the season starts. I mean, they could be, that's a question we get on the checkerboard almost daily is what's going to happen. Is one going to leave after the season? It's almost certainly that's going to happen, right? I mean, I think people should just go ahead and expect it. I mean, but there is a scenario where through injury effectiveness or ineffectiveness, I should say, both these guys play a lot and start games. And then maybe in December, Tennessee's right back in the same situation where they almost have to choose one. So again, it could play out any number of different ways. But I'm still not coming off Faison yet, but Georgia's made it interesting for sure. And that was something that in all of the things I wrote on the site where it was Faison, it was always the caveat, well, George can still flip the script because he's talented. This is a guy that chose Tennessee, the home state program, over Alabama. He chose them over LSU. And he's a guy that made a big jump from spring to preseason camp last year. We saw him do this already, so maybe we shouldn't be surprised that he's pushed. And as Ryan alluded to, he probably was aware that what the narrative was out there, that Faison was getting all the hype that he was getting going into spring. So, that brings out a competitive edge in guys at times. And I think it has for him, and he's been sharper so far through preseason camp than he was in the spring. And that has made this thing interesting. And we'll just have to see how it plays out and who moves the offense the best and who gives Tennessee and the coaching staff what they're looking for, not only in practice, but also in the scrimmages too. Those are going to loom very large because those are key evaluation points where they're the most game-like settings that they're going to have before they actually play a game.
Ryan, how much Josh Dobbs' situation is there with Faison Brandon in the sense of Tennessee's coaches at the time were not able to properly evaluate Dobbs because
and Hendon Hooker too.
And Hendon Hooker, yes, thank you for bringing that example up. An even better example because this coaching staff dealt with Hendon Hooker, but where you know that's part of Faison's game, his ability to get out, run, make plays, and not that George is a stiff back there and isn't able to do the same thing, but it seems like Faison is a little bit better at doing that. Do you think that Faison is at a disadvantage in that regard because he won't be able to show off that skill set as much as he would be able to in a game, which who knows, maybe that's the difference in winning the job.
Yeah, that is the fascinating element of this. And I don't think scrimmages completely replicate that because you're not making the quarterbacks live. You're just not. If they got a quarterback hurt in a scrimmage setting like this, it would be not viewed very favorably. So you got to.
It would make their decision easier, though.
Yeah. So you gotta play it safe. You got to keep those guys in non-contact jerseys in all likelihood, and that does make it tough to assess exactly what you have in Faison Brandon as a runner and as a scrambler. But yeah, at the same time, you can see that some. And I also think decision making has so much to do with playing quarterback, though, that's ultimately what it comes down to. If you're a great runner, but you're choosing to pull it and run too much, and you're kind of abandoning the passing game and not looking at all your options first, like that. That's something you can see in a scrimmage. So a lot of it still does come down to decision making. Are you holding the ball too long? Those kinds of things. And you can see whether a quarterback started. You're not maybe simulating the full speed because these guys don't have the physical threat of if I hold on to the ball too long, I'm going to get bulldozed by a 320-pound defensive tackle. They don't have that element of it in the scrimmage, but there's still the sense of I've got to get out of the pocket so I can make a play in a scrimmage. And so you still can see some of that. So I do think that you have a hard time replicating that. But yeah, playing quarterback and part of, I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea about Faison Brandon also, because the reality is like so many quarterbacks in this area who are good runners, he's a great passer too. And that's why he was such a highly ranked player. So the biggest part of what makes him special is throwing the ball. He just happens to be a good runner in addition to that. So he's going to be able to make a strong case either way. I don't think this is quite the same as Josh Dobbs, where he early in his career kind of evolved into a pretty heavy running quarterback at times, and really turned into a tank the way he developed physically by his senior year. Faison Brandon is built a little bit like that, but I don't know that we're going to see the same kind of progression in him as a runner where you're going to see him running 15, 20 times a game. Maybe not, but I don't see that in his game right now. I think he still is the guy that looks to throw first, and the decision-making is such a key part at that position that you're still going to get at least a pretty good read on that in the scrimmage setting, just maybe not exactly what he would do. Like you whistle it after he gets out of the pocket and a defender gets close, you kind of whistle the play dead and move on to the next one. There's maybe where you don't get to see, okay, would that have been a 20-yard run or a 10-yard run, but you still get at least a sense of what he might have done there.
All right, Patrick, what's the latest on Tennessee's health entering Saturday's scrimmage? It seems to be a little more upbeat than the last time we spoke.
Yeah, I think I'm going to hit on 3 guys, and y'all can add any more if I'm forgetting somebody. But Ty Redmond, saw him running on the side again on Wednesday. So I think he's continuing to ramp up, should be good to go. Certainly by next week, I think you're getting close to full involvement based on his illness, coming off his illness. Still no Ethan Davis. We'll see if he's out on the practice field Friday morning. They said it was a precaution, but he's missed a week now. They are getting to look at the other tight ends for an extended period of time. So that's probably maybe beneficial in the long run. But we'll see. Again, we'll see if Davis is back out there. He's almost one of the first guys you check to see if he's back out there. And then the 2 other red jersey notes. Carson Gentle is out of the red jersey, or was on Wednesday for the first time. So we'll see if he can get in the mix at all on the defensive line, which we're about to talk about. And the other, I think, bigger red jersey addition is Rodarius Jackson, who practiced in red on Tuesday and Wednesday. And I think as we touched on then, you don't want to be limited in practice when you're in a position battle like he is. And so is he going to be able to go in the scrimmage? That's obviously going to open the door for Travis Smith Jr. there. And obviously I think TK Keys is continuing to ramp up his I think looks like he's pretty much full go right now. Looks a lot more fluid out there running routes, and what we get to see, obviously had the catch that they put on Twitter the other day. So as long as that door is open, and I think y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we sort of viewed Rodarius as the favorite for that spot going into camp. But if he's missing time, that's going to open the door for other guys to step up and make plays. So I think that one is still to be determined, and certainly availability is starting to play a factor in that decision as well. I will say this: I don't know what the injury is with Jackson, but he did have a sleeve on his right leg. Didn't look like he was moving 100%. So, but that's just what I saw. I don't have any indication on what the injury is that he's dealing with.
And Ryan, it does feel like Travis Smith Jr. has moved ahead of Rodarius Jackson and TK Keys for potentially being that third starter if there was a game tomorrow. Of course, there's still a long ways to go.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, but I don't know about that. What I've continued to hear, I think it might still be, if they were starting a game today, going into the week 1 today, I think it still might be Rodarius Jackson, but it would be with some hesitation. I think the problem is he's banged up right now. And I think I've been told it might be an upper body injury of some sort. But either way, dealing with something there, and he's had some drops, and that's maybe the concerning thing, is that's something we heard even back in the spring. It's been kind of a recurring thing. It's not all the time, but it's often enough to be a concern. And Travis Smith Jr. has come on. I still think at the end of the day, the ability side of the conversation might lean toward Rodarius Jackson and TK Keys being the most likely to get that third job over Travis Smith Jr. if TK keeps this up. He's made some plays already that have caused people to think it might be tough to keep this guy off the field. The highlights that he's provided have been among the highlights Tennessee's made at the wide receiver position. So he is turning some heads in camp with what he's doing out there. It's not every single time he touches the ball, but it's often enough to make people think that this guy's pretty good, and we might have to really give him some consideration here. So as he continues to ramp things up and looks like he's full go, that's something that could become more and more of a factor. And then Travis Smith Jr. certainly has taken advantage of Rodarius being banged up and looks like he's made some strides since last year. So I think he's part of that discussion too. I just think the natural ability still might favor Jackson and Keys if it came down to it in that conversation. But Smith is making things interesting because he's doing a lot of things right, and he's always looked like $1 million with that build he's gotten. It's gotten even better this offseason. So it is a three-way race now, and I think this first scrimmage will give us some clarity at least on where things stand. But I think if they gun to their head, I think if they had to make a call today, I still think it would be Jackson, but it wouldn't be by much. And that's a bit of a surprise to me. I thought this was kind of maybe not an open and shut case, but going into camp, I really thought Rodarius Jackson was going to win that job, and there wouldn't be a ton of drama. It looks like he's opened the door to there maybe being some drama there, and TK Keys coming on, not helping his cause there. So I think there's actually some pressure on. Well, we'll get to that in a minute, but I think there is some pressure on Jackson.
Either of you feel like Carson Gentle is going to be able to carve out a role? He's a name that hasn't been brought up a ton outside of just the simple fact that he's been in a red jersey.
I would say he's a guy that can help this team at the back end of that rotation. I don't know the part I don't know about that is how it depends on how they use the front seven or the front six on defense. Are they gonna use more 3 linebacker sets? If they do, that might cut into the opportunities for a guy like Carson Gentle. Is David Hobbs going to get some time at defensive end? It sounds like that's a real possibility where he's getting some looks there as an outside guy, in addition to playing defensive tackle, particularly on early downs. He's playing on the outside in some situations. So does that cut into the opportunity for a guy like Gentle? So I think he can be a factor, but I don't know how big the rotation gets. If this is previous years where Rodney Garner's dead set on playing 12 guys and they're always in 4-man fronts and they've got that Leo position always on the field in its form that we've seen in the previous defense, then yeah, I think Gentle could maybe help this team. Now it depends on how they use these guys and what kind of looks they have on a regular basis. So I think he's in the mix there, and he's got to show he can be someone they can count on. But you've got Marion Dye, obviously. You've got Tyree Weathersby. It looks like he's leading the way still at that defensive end position. You got Jordan Norman, the Tulane transfer that's going to be a big factor in this defensive line. So he's behind some of those other guys, but he's definitely in the mix and could be at least a back end of the rotation guy if he continues to progress.
And he could, if they bring back the jumbo package on offense, he was part of that as an extra tight end. So he could play there. But I agree with Ryan. I think he's probably behind Tyree Weathersby, who, adding the injury thing, was supposed to do interviews on Wednesday, was in the treatment room. Doesn't sound too big of an issue, but he might be a guy we'll be checking on Friday morning when we get a little bit of an open practice look. But probably behind Weathersby, Jordan Norman, who Rodney Garner hyped up a little bit on Wednesday, Dye, and then what are they going to use a Leo? Is it sounds like Kedrick Golston, they like him a little bit more than Christian Gass at this point. It's just going to depend on the lineup and how they line those guys up, and Hobbs being in there in that mix too, it adds another body in the way for Carson to get any sort of meaningful playing time. So I'd lean no at this point.
Speaking of that defensive line room, we'll take a brief break from previewing the scrimmage and discuss Rodney Garner's thoughts on his defensive line room when he met with the media on Wednesday. He did admit towards the end of his 10 minutes with the media that he likes his group. He even took accountability in a sense, not that he shies away from it. He said multiple times he's got to coach his guys up better, but he started off by saying that the group has been inconsistent. Part of that is because of all the roster attrition. It's a younger group in some ways, but it's certainly an unproven group, and he feels like part of the inconsistencies is because he missed time in the spring because he was out due to health reasons. But the gist of it, even though he did come back around and say that he likes his group, the gist of it was that, Patrick, it's a very inconsistent group, and they've got to get moving in the right direction here in a hurry.
Yeah, he dogged them for about 8 minutes and then was like, well, they're talented. So, yeah, he did, kind of provide some encouragement there. Probably the most interesting thing he said is that because of the time he missed in the spring, he feels like he's coaching like he was 5-10 years younger. I think he's 60 off the top of my head. I did a thing on the coaching staff and put all their ages in there, so it all runs together. I think he's about – we get all the questions about him retiring every year, and it's like he just signed a 2-year extension. They're paying him $1 million. I don't think he's going anywhere anytime soon. The fact that he says he's feeling like he's coaching like he's younger now, my thought is you can put that stuff aside. And the other part is God help these defensive linemen if that's the case, because he's already aggressive and has no filter out there on the practice field. But the thing you always hear about Rodney is that he coaches them tough and coaches them hard and loves them harder. So he loves it's an interesting dynamic with all of his guys there, but it's not for everybody. And probably the biggest takeaway, as you touched on, Ben, was just, hey, we're inconsistent. And to his point, like when you've got talented players, but they haven't done it. There's no more Bryson's and Joshua Josephs and all those guys that have been and done it. They've been there and done it. None of these guys have really done that. Some of these guys have played, right? David Hobbs, Nathan Robinson, Tyree Weathersby, they've all played snaps. Xavier Gillum played at Penn State. Jordan Norman's played a lot of his 2 stops. So these guys have played, but everybody's stepping up a level, right? Some guys have to go from just role players to being starters and playing a lot. Some of these sophomores, the Ethan Utleys of the world, they have to grow up and give you quality rotational snaps. And then, I mentioned Kedrick Golson, JJ Finch is another freshman. Can they get in there and at the back end of the rotation? Everybody's sort of elevating and stepping up a notch. But when you're in those situations and you're talented, you're going to have moments where that talent flashes, and then you're going to have moments where it doesn't because you're still trying to figure it out. So he said that's not really a surprise. And I think the interesting thing is he said, hey, I've got 5 guys off of last year's defensive line that are in NFL training camps right now. So I kind of expected this, right? Like it's but that's not an excuse. You can't use that you're young and haven't played or this, that, and the other for an excuse. And his favorite phrase is always move the needle, and it's hard to do that when you're being up and down. So I do think, he separated Xavier Gilliam and Jordan Norman as the 2 guys that have been most productive. I don't think he wanted to put Tyree Weathersby with those 2, but he also made sure to point out that he wasn't with the rest of the inconsistent bunch of guys that he was sort of down on. He even, threw it at David Hobbs, hey, he's got to get out of his feelings, which is some tough talk for a guy that's been around and maybe yet to put it all together, although injuries have certainly hurt his development. But it's always a refreshing listen when Rodney Garner's at the podium in the springs and preseason camps we get him. And I certainly felt like he was pretty honest Wednesday about where the state of his group is. And it's an unknown for me. It's a big question mark for me because that group's got to be – I think that group determines the ceiling for Tennessee's defense this season because you have to be able to stop the run and get after the quarterback. And I think the jury is still out, and we're not really going to find out until the season gets here if Tennessee's defensive line is going to be good enough for them to do that.
I definitely don't expect as much from Tennessee's defensive line this year because of how much they are replacing. But it is a group that really has a lot of potential because if Gilliam and Hobbs especially play up to their ceilings, they've got they've got NFL high round NFL potential in my opinion. So if those guys play up to their potential, if Tyree Weathersby is what Tennessee seems to think he can be, it could still be a really good group. So that to me is as big of a question mark on this team. So it's not shocking to hear Rodney Garner talking about the inconsistency there in camp with all they lost from last year. And yeah, I've got real questions about that group. But at the same time, they could answer those questions really well. It's just, I think the pass rush is the one that I just don't know if we're going to get much of an answer on that unit because I don't know how much they got to figure out how much the Leo is going to be on the field, how much they're going to use four down linemen all the time. And are they going to mix in some 3 linebacker looks or even more linebackers on the field? I think we might get some pretty exotic looks from Jim Knowles. So that is one of the fascinating things about this first scrimmage to kind of tie it back to that is how much do they experiment and do they start to zero in on what they want to do most of the time defensively with this group? Because I think that there is some level of experimenting going on. And the defensive line plays a big role in that. How effective they are is going to determine how many of them are on the field at times, I think, because they do have some really good options in those 3 linebacker packages and maybe even 4 linebacker packages. So you've got some things to toy around with. And if those guys play up to their potential in the D-line, if Hobbs and Gilliam are good, if Weathersby and Jordan Norman are good, that makes a stronger case maybe for playing 4 down linemen. So I think that's a big question mark I have about this scrimmage is how good that defensive line looks to sort of make a case for them to have more guys on the field.
All right, Ryan, when you look at the offense in this first scrimmage on Saturday, what is most important for the offense to accomplish outside of the quarterback position? Are you going back to that 3rd receiver spot that we talked about earlier, or are you going elsewhere?
I'm going elsewhere because I think the offensive line still looms large for this team. I think because you've got a young quarterback, you've got to be good up front. And I think they need to be able to start to figure out who their starting 5 are going to be. This staff at the same time doesn't always seem to rush to picking a starting 5 for whatever reason. They don't seem to always have just a ton of urgency to let those guys kind of mesh together and start to build some chemistry. But I think it could be important to do that. And the big thing is, can Ori Williams lock down that right tackle position? It sounds like he's had a pretty good start to camp to where he's maybe strengthened his grasp on that position and made it more likely that Jesse Perry's going to start off at right guard. So does that continue? Do we hear some concerns about Ori Williams at all coming out of this scrimmage with they've not done much full pads work to this point. They just put on full pads Wednesday for the first time. So this next couple of days will answer a lot of questions, I think, about that group. And if you start to get some clarity on the offensive line, it's easier for the rest of the offense to sort of do what it needs to do. In some ways, the receiver play doesn't matter as much if you're not protecting the quarterback as well as they need to. And up front last year, they weren't very good at the end of the year I thought one of the most interesting comments out of camp so far is Glenn Ellerbe talking about the offensive line wilting in the second half last season. You look at the numbers; they were kind of ugly. They rushed for more than 5 yards a carry, and for their first 6 games last year, the final 7 games, they didn't average 5 yards a carry or more than 5 yards a carry in any individual game, including a non-conference game against New Mexico State. In the first 6 games, they allowed a combined 4 sacks. In the last 7 games, they gave up 4 sacks in a game 3 times, it might have been 4 times, and they allowed 18 sacks total. So just really not good down the stretch. And you've got some question marks there. David Sanders at left tackle. He's moving from right tackle back to a position he considers home. But how good is he going to be? Can he take a pretty big jump from last year when he obviously looked like a true freshman at times and had some missed blocks that contributed to some sacks and things like that? Can Sam Pendleton take a step forward at center or at least lock down that position? Because I think he's getting some competition at least at that spot. And then at right tackle, can Ori Williams lock things down and be a full-time starter for the first time, which he hasn't been at his previous school? Those 3 guys in particular have to answer some questions, and then you got to figure out what you want to do at guard with Sham Umarov also pushing and Donovan Haslam too, a guy that Glenn Ellerbe had some good things to say about. So I think the offensive line is still where I'm most fascinated to see how things are going to play out in the scrimmage. Aside from the quarterbacks on offense, you've got to get some good play up front and answer some questions about who your 5 are going to be to make things around them make more sense.
Patrick, where are you going?
I'd probably go receiver, but I'm going to bring up the running backs. We haven't really talked a whole lot about them, and I think they're going to be managing Deshaun Bishop quite a bit. I'm not sure he's going to get the DGG Baylor Buford treatment where he gets like a few plays. It might be a series or 2. They're not going to. With a running back like him, you want to get him some hits so he's ready for the season. But you don't want to add to the wear and tear that he is undoubtedly going to face. And in Deshaun's case, are we looking at a Dylan Sampson kind of workload? I don't think so, but maybe not far off. I think he's got that. If he's able to be durable, he's got the ability to take because he got 1 million snaps or he got 1 million carries in high school, so he's used to it. So if he's getting limited opportunities, that's going to present more of an opportunity for Tulane transfer Javen Gordon and the other 2 sophomores in that room, Dwan Morris and Justin Baker, to sort of show what they could do. And so that's going to be an important evaluation for Darrell Sims and that position group. And I will continue to maintain that Gordon sounds like he's got the edge to be RB2. And this week, as you get more pads on and play a little bit more football, his style running, this is a chance for him to continue to sort of strengthen his grip on that position and of being that top complement to Bishop. So I'd go there. But Ryan made a lot of points on the offensive line. And then, of course, what do you get at the receiver position? Can anybody emerge there and separate there in that competition and show that they can complement Braylon Staley and Mike Matthews in the passing game?
Yeah, I would go offensive line outside of quarterback. That wide receiver, that third wide receiver and backup running back are certainly important, especially the backup running back because of what you just got done talking about with the workload of Deshaun Bishop. You would like to keep him as fresh as possible. You want to use him in the fourth quarter more. You want him to be fresh the second half of the season, and the backup running backs are going to determine whether they are able to do that or not. You don't want him to have a Dylan Sampson type workload. Not that Deshaun isn't capable of handling it, but you would just like to avoid that if you can. But I'd go along the offensive line just with the uncertainty with Ori Williams and Sam Pendleton as well, just because he was plagued by injury last year, but the center position was not what this offense needed it to be. And so I think Sam Pendleton and Ori Williams, I think those 2's success this season is going to have a huge say in the overall offense's success. So those are the 2 guys I would go to outside of the quarterback position, of course. Ryan, I think I know where you're going with the offensive player who has the most pressure on themselves with this first scrimmage.
Yeah, you probably do. I'm going to go with Rodarius Jackson because he has kind of opened the door to those other guys at wide receiver that are hoping to earn more playing time, hoping to earn a starting job. He had a chance, I think, to kind of establish himself a little more as the guy to beat at that position this spring, and he didn't quite do it. This staff has always liked his ability. He can really leap. He's got good size. He can run pretty well. A lot of things to like about his game all around, but he was a little raw coming out of high school, and you kind of saw that at times. And at the same time, he got out there in some games, and what was it, the Vanderbilt game where he made that low catch that was really impressive. He had some moments still where you could see flashes of his abilities. So still had plenty of things he needed to work on this year, and then now you're throwing in the durability concern here in camp with him not being out there without some limitations or being in a red jersey. So that's one interesting thing. Is he going to be limited at all in this scrimmage? I don't know if that's the case, but it's something to keep an eye on since he has been in a red jersey lately. And then he's got to play more consistently. He's got to not drop any passes. That's the one thing I think that's, as much as anything, opening the door for other people is Rodarius dropping balls. If he keeps dropping balls, that's going to leave this as a really close competition, I think, with TK Keys and Travis Smith Jr. And if he can, on the flip side, start to eliminate those drops that he's had, I think he can, make a pretty strong case that he's the safest choice for Tennessee as that number 3 receiver to open the season. And obviously the situation with TK Keys may play out throughout the year. He may ramp up more as the season goes, even if he's not a starter to open the year. So he's going to have him nipping at his heels, even if he wins the job. He definitely needs to win the job if he wants to hold on to it and play a lot this year. So I think there's pressure on Rodarius Jackson. He's got to answer the bell here and get healthy and play better to hold off those guys kind of nipping on his heels.
Patrick,
do I get to pick the quarterbacks, or are they off limits?
You can pick the quarterbacks, but let me phrase it like this, because I was actually going to ask you this. Do you have a strong opinion that either quarterback has more pressure than the other?
I didn't hear the question. You froze on me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you have a strong opinion on whether either quarterback has more pressure than the other?
Based on how the first week and a half of camp's gone, I think Faison's got to respond, and that's not to say he's been bad. But if you're seeing George McIntyre make a push, then this is your chance to go out there and push back. I mean, that's what we've seen, right? I mean, it was Faison all summer and then leading into camp, and for good reason. Like none of that stuff was misguided by anybody, I don't think. But it's made George respond with the way he's pushed here at the start of camp and thrown the football. And now you need Faison to go out there and show that you can move the offense and make the right decisions and take care of the football. And I go back to one of the spring scrimmages he had. He threw a pick 60 to Idris Farouk and then came back and had one of the few touchdowns the offense actually scored in the 2 scrimmages they had, and if you want to throw in the spring game as well. I think he's got to respond of the 2, just because I think McIntyre has put him in that position. For non-quarterback position, I think the most pressure is on Ori Williams, right? Because I think Tennessee views him. I think their preference is that he's the right tackle and they play Jesse Parrott guard. I think that's what Tennessee maybe would prefer. I don't know that they would admit this. But I think that's maybe your best 5 at their most natural positions. We can make an argument about what is Jesse Perry's most natural position, but it just feels like all offseason they've been training him to get ready to play guard more. But they needed Ori to sort of lock that position down. You hear Glenn Ellerby's comments the other day talking about how it gets pissed off if he's not getting reps and other people are taking advantage of him and he's in a battle. And that seemed to have maybe spurred some more of the improvements that he's made over the summer with his body, learning the offense. And Ellerby had a comment too, where it's like, okay, you're 90% clean on your mental on your assignments. You need to be 100%. He goes out there in 100% in a scrimmage setting, no penalties, any of that stuff. He's going to make that job his. I think Shem Umarov is probably the most likely candidate to break that 5 up as we view it, right? Sanders, Moy, Pendleton, Perry, and Ori Williams. But if I feel like the ball is in Williams' court to go out there and lock that job up. The player I'm most interested to hear about, and I'll throw this in at the end, is Desan Brame, because I feel like he had 2 really good scrimmages in the spring, and with Ethan Davis being out, he's tied in 1 right now. So if he can continue to show that he's able to handle all of those roles that we've heard that he's made strides being in the core and blocking, if he can continue to do that and maybe make some more plays in the passing game, I think that guy's got a chance to have a big season, and this is a chance for him to sort of show that he can be that all-around guy. Because even if Ethan Davis is back on Friday, after a week-long absence, you may not scrimmage him or you may not let him do a whole lot in the scrimmage. So I think that's a big opportunity for Brame to sort of remind Tennessee's coaching staff, hey, look what I can do. I need to be involved in this offense this season.
I will say on the quarterback thing, I think there is still pressure on both of these guys because I think it is a close race. And George McIntyre has done some good things for sure to this point in camp, but that the team periods, we don't know about. They're pretty limited usually. You're not getting an hour in practice to do 11-on-11 stuff. So you're not necessarily seeing, okay, do they take a 13-play drive and then how do they follow it up or things like that. And you break it up in a scrimmage too, where you're usually trading off drives with the different quarterbacks. So, but yeah, when they make a mistake, do they get to answer on the next drive? Things like that. How does he operate in the red zone? So there are still a lot of things George McIntyre has to show, and one of them is, can he consistently stretch the field? Can he make plays in the downfield passing game? I think that's the big key. Faison Brandon showed up a little bit more this spring with splashy plays in the passing game. I think George McIntyre has to continue to show in this scrimmage that this offense is explosive with him in there. If he's just a check down guy making 10-yard throws, I think Faison Brandon gives you a more exciting ceiling that makes him harder to turn down in that case. He's got to be able to stretch the field. I thought that was important for him in the spring, and he didn't do it enough. He's done a little better, it sounds like, in camp so far, but in a game-like setting, he's got to show he can stretch the field.
All right, Patrick, where are you going on defense? What's objective number one for the defense as a whole in this first scrimmage?
Well, Jim Knowles would say, stop the offense. It doesn't matter what the setting is, game, scrimmage. Our number one job is to stop the offense. No, I think the key, and Ryan talked a little bit about this early, is they've got to figure out what are their best 3 or 4 go-to lineups in the front 6 or 7. I don't really have a whole lot of questions about the secondary right now, and just in terms of who's going to be out there, right? Like TJ Metcalf and Idris Fruch are going to be your starting safeties. DeJuan Lane's going to play as the third safety. Dylan Lewis is probably next in line. And again, Knowles talked him up going into camp too. So he's a guy you can see on the field. Cornerback, their situation is sort of, I don't want to say been forced, but without, with Ty Redmond and Kaden Lee are going to be your starters. And then because Jadis Richards is out, Trey Poteet and Tim Merritt are going to be your second guys up. Yeah. So this is maybe a big scrimmage at the cornerback position for all those freshmen, the Zay Andersons and Javonte Smiths and even Joel Wyatt. What does he show in a scrimmage setting at corner? Just because, you get a couple more injuries at cornerback, you're counting on these guys. And then obviously they got to find a backup for Quay Moss at nickel. But to me, it's so much more open-ended on what the defensive line and linebackers are going to look like, because they need to figure out what's their best combinations, right? Is it 3 linebackers? Is it 4 down front with Hobbs at end and 2 of the tackles, right? Are you looking at Nathan Robinson and Xavier Gillum as your inside guys? What's your best pass rush lineup? Are you going 4 down? As Jordan Norman showed enough through this stage of camp that he's a guy that you absolutely want on the field on 3rd down or at the end of games when the other team's throwing and you're trying to protect the lead. What is the right combination of linebackers too? And you've maybe got a plan for a series or 2 of the scrimmage to not have Aaron Carter, because you're going to need that. Know what you got at Georgia Tech there. So that's the big question to me, is what does these lineups look like? Who plays where? And how does Knowles and the defensive staff feel coming out of this about, like, okay, these are the guys we want starting. These are the guys. This is the combination we want for these situations, and that kind of thing. That's the big question to me on this defense is less about performance and more about, okay, who's going to play where and why and how are they going to use all these guys that they've been evaluating in the spring, and now they've been moving towards tinkering with different lineups and 3 linebacker sets and all that kind of stuff. How does it continue to play out that process for Knowles and the staff?
And I want to see or find out how these young defensive linemen perform. I think that's a big part of this is, how much can you count on Ethan Utley? How much can you count on Isaiah Campbell, who's been in a red jersey lately? How much can you count on Kedrick Golson, a true freshman at the Leo position? If those guys can show they're reliable and consistently getting into the backfield, that makes a big difference for this team and might lend itself to Tennessee playing a deeper rotation on the defensive line and maybe using more of those 4 down lineman sets. So that's a big deal in this scrimmage, I think, seeing how many of those guys you can count on. Can J.J. Finch, as Patrick mentioned earlier, play a good bit as a true freshman? Can Breeze Carter or any of those types of guys step forward as someone else you can count on? This scrimmage, again, because they haven't been in full pads much, this scrimmage is big for those guys to kind of prove themselves as someone they can count on as more than just depth going into the season.
Yeah, I'd go up front along the defensive line just as a position group as a whole, just because of how vital that position is. We can talk about the secondary, and I certainly agree that this is a big scrimmage for the secondary. Interested to see how they do defending Braylon Staley, Mike Matthews, who have phenomenal starts to camp. Desan Brame has had a nice start. How do they handle him in the middle of the field? But the defensive line sure can make life easier on the back end if they are generating a pass rush, if they are stopping the run. And it does work both ways. I guess it depends on which side of the opinion that you're on, because the secondary can also help the defensive line by sticking the guys that they're covering and allowing them more time to get after the quarterback. But I guess overall, Patrick, the defense, I think, should have the better hand this scrimmage, and I say that just because of the inexperience at quarterback. Would you agree with that, or do you think who do you expect to win the scrimmage if you had to guess?
Probably the defense, because they won both scrimmages and the orange and white game, and based on what we heard and what we saw on that Saturday in Neyland back in April. And so I until the offense goes out there and just lights it up, you got to kind of lean defense for that, for the edge there. But you don't want one side to dominate the other side. That's what you don't want.
No,
yeah, I would
Ryan,
agree the defense,
would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the defense is more likely to win it. I think the big reason for that, honestly, though, is the defensive system for Jim Knowles. he throws a lot of different looks at opposing offenses and seems to really like to disguise looks, and that caused some problems for the quarterbacks. That's one reason they weren't very good in the spring. I think that's an underrated aspect of this quarterback competition, is how much they're getting prepared for the things they're going to see this season by what Jim Knowles is throwing at them on the practice field on a pretty regular basis. So especially in a scrimmage setting where they're potentially going to be experimenting with multiple different fronts and seeing what they want to do with their defenders in the box, that makes things difficult for quarterbacks, seeing all these different looks. And the secondary has played well in camp and in spring practice, and that obviously makes things tough for a young quarterback. So yeah, I think the defense, we're probably more likely to hear that the defense had a pretty good day, but you don't want to hear that neither quarterback made much happen. I think that's what we heard in both of the scrimmages, really, in the spring, leading up to the spring game. Even the spring game, they didn't do much. They had the 2-minute drive where George McIntyre led them in the field goal range. That was about it as far as offensive highlights, aside from the long run by Javen Gordon that day. So you really want to hear more about the offense making some things happen. But I still think the setup probably lends itself to the defense having another pretty good day because of what Jim Knowles is going to throw at them.
Ryan clearly forgot about the Ryan Staub touchdown pass.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, how could I forget? There were people clamoring for Staub to win the job after that day. At least a little bit.
Disrespectful. And he's got your name. You think you'd remember that, but
he does.
All I know, if Patrick Staub had thrown it, I definitely would have remembered it.
Ryan, which defensive player do you feel will be playing with the most pressure on Saturday?
Yeah, I thought about this one. It's a tricky one because I don't think there are as many, or there are a few individual guys you can easily point to on offense. On defense, it's a little bit more complicated. But I'll go with David Hobbs, because he's a guy that Tennessee needs to play well this year. And when Rodney Garner is talking about his group being inconsistent, and he's pointing to 2 transfers as the guys that are most consistently productive, in Jordan Norman and Xavier Gilliam, you want to hear David Hobbs being one of those guys. And he had an injury, obviously, this spring, set him back a little bit, but it's a contract year for him. This is a guy who wants to be in the NFL draft come January. He obviously has shown flashes of enormous potential, but this is a big year for him. He wants to have a Justin Harrell type, for those fans that go way back, breakout year, a Robert Ayers type breakout year, where you're seeing him put up big numbers this year. So if we're not hearing about David Hobbs making some things happen in either of these 2 preseason scrimmages, I think that's a little bit of a concern. So I'll say Hobbs needs to answer the bell. He's been dealt a bad hand and had some bad luck with injuries and surgeries and things like that. But it's his senior year. It's go time. So he gets his chance to be a starter in all likelihood for the first time and really show what he can do. So I think you want to hear about him making some plays, and he needs to show Rodney Garner that he's one of those consistent guys he can count on.
My turn now?
Yes, it's your turn.
Okay. I don't want to step over the lines and misspeak or speak when Someone else is going to talk.
Just don't speak about grocery stores.
All about ball today. My pressure guys, and Ryan made a good pick of Hobbs. He theoretically could come back in 2027 with the 5-year rule, but he said in his interview at Media Day that, hey, this is my last year. So that's how he's viewing it. Although we'll see how the season goes. Defensive lineman, that's a nice premium position in the portal, not in the portal, but in general in college football now. So you could, it could be lucrative to come back another year, is what I'm saying, for a guy like him if he doesn't maybe play like he wants to. But that's down the road. In terms of this scrimmage, I just keep kind of thinking of I want to say Trey Poteet. I don't know if he's under pressure, but I think he's a guy that you want to see him play well enough that you're not freaking out and panicking about having to play your third cornerback so you don't run Ty Redmond and Kane Lee into the ground during the season. So I think he's a guy that has, I think, had a good offseason. I think he just needs to keep it going. But pressure, I'm just going to go to Jaden Perlotti because I feel like he's a guy that you're going to want on the field in some situations. I don't know that he's ready to be an every down linebacker. I don't think you need to be taking Arion Carter or Edwin Spillman or Jeremiah Thielander or Mike Campbell off the field for him in a lot of situations. But, man, on third down, if you need a guy to go get the quarterback or spy an athletic guy, and they're going to play some athletic quarterbacks this season, he's a guy that you want on the field in those scenarios because of his athleticism. He's just such a springy, long framed out athlete that skill set, I'd want that on the field if it were me, but he's got to earn it. And so I'm wondering where does he fit in with, that kind of top quartet at linebacker. Then you got the 2 freshmen that are coming on too. So where does he fit into the mix for Tennessee, or does he? I think he's got to go out there and show that he can execute when he needs to. But, man, I think that skill set is one you'd want on the field on third down, given some of Tennessee's questions. And but they've also got some good blitzers on the team. I think Arion and Edwin Spillman are both very effective blitzers that you could use. But, just Perlotti, this is his time, I think, to show Knowles and those guys, hey, I need to be on the field in some of these situations. And even if it's just a dozen plays a game, he can still make an impact. We saw it last year. I think his PFF numbers where he had 23 pass rush snaps and 12 pressures, which is insane. Had a couple of fumbles. The ball seemed to, find him when he was on the field late down the stretch of the season. So that's a guy I'd be trying to find a role for, but he's got to go out there and show that he deserves one.
I'll say that there's some outside pressure on Jeremiah Thielander. I do think he has had a really good offseason. I think he's changed his body, which was needed because he needed to get more athletic and quicker, and I think he's done that. He's made some plays. We'll see how that translates to the season once they play outside competition. But just because of how deep the room is, we need to see that start to translate to 11-on-11 work consistently, scrimmage work. And, again, just because of how deep that room is, they're going to be fighting and clawing with each other for reps, especially the top end with all those veterans, Arion, Amari Campbell. I have a bunch of stock in Edwin Spillman. I think it's just a matter of time before he breaks out. So it's outside pressure because I don't think Jeremiah is the personality to see it that way, certainly. And there's no questioning his leadership. He is one of the leaders on this team. But I think he is somebody, an older guy, that there are a bunch of talented bodies behind him. I think his great offseason, you need to see the fruits of that labor in these type of settings. Ryan, were you going to add something a moment ago?
I think I might have been like, I was just going to say, I was saying that was a good pick with Patrick, saying Jaden Perlotti. I think it's a good choice. You can only play so many linebackers this year. And we've talked about it before. William Minge can say all he wants that you got to play without an ego. Somebody's going to be upset with their role this year. There's just no way around it. There's not enough snaps to go around. If you're Jaden Perlotti, you're looking around at that room, you see 4 veterans at that position, 3 of them seniors that are going to be playing a lot of football, probably no matter what. So you've got to make a case that they've got to put you on the field. Now, the flip side, maybe some of these 3 or even 4 linebacker sets open the door for a guy like him to have a specialty type role. But to Patrick's point, he's got to show he's worthy of being in that type of role because it's still going to take away snaps from someone a little more proven than him going into the season.
We'll have plenty of preview coverage leading up to Saturday's scrimmage number 1 up at the site at GoVols247.com. As I mentioned earlier, Tennessee will be back on the practice field on Friday, and then Josh Heupel will speak to the media after scrimmage on Saturday. That will happen late morning, 11 a.m. to the noon hours. So be on the lookout for Heupel content and scrimmage reaction. Then we are speaking to Kelsey Pope after Friday morning's practice, which should be fun since, yes, he does have some question marks in his room, but boy, is it going to be a treat for Tennessee fans to watch Mike Matthews and Braylon Staley this season. And it'll be fun to hear what Kelsey Pope has to say about those guys. And he's always a fun interview. I feel like keeps it pretty honest and pretty blunt. So always enjoy hearing Kelsey Pope speak. And to find all of our work, Ryan, it's a great time to sign up for GoVols247.com.
Yeah, absolutely. 60% off right now on our preseason camp sale. No better time to join the site. Obviously, going into the first scrimmage, we'll have some VIP reactions and intel on what we are hearing coming out of the scrimmage and all that over the weekend. So you'll definitely want to be on the site and check out all that coverage throughout the weekend and into next week. And this quarterback battle is heated up. Recruiting coverage. Don't forget Caden Kraft, the 4-star quarterback, announcing his decision on Monday. And Tennessee's a finalist there for the top 247 prospect out of North Carolina. So lots going on right now. Great time to join the site and take advantage of that 60% off sale at GoVols247.com.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
Are we not going to talk about special teams in the scrimmage? I mean,
No.
this house is a prison.
We'll talk about them after the scrimmage when we hear whether they kicked the ball well or not. We won't talk about Jackson Ross because Jackson Ross is going to be awesome, but we will break down
Obviously,
if there are any bad moments in the kicking game. Which
who's going to return? We get a lot of questions about who's going to return punts.
Yeah,
we do. So.
I'm afraid it's not going to be Tyreek King for those who are hoping for that. I could be wrong, but I'm a bit of a skeptic on that one. So I think it's more likely to be Quay Moss or someone like that.
Seems like Quay Moss is getting a lot of work back there. But no need to
Duarte, could be Dawn Morris. They got options.
Yep.
They do have options. Patrick, enjoy watching the specialists on Friday morning at practice.
I always do, Ben.
For Patrick Brown and Ryan Callahan, I'm Ben McKee. This has been another edition of the GoVols247 Podcast.